In the February edition of the Job Sync Roundtable, they chat with Brigitte Orrick, Director of Talent Development, as she walks through how she built a recruiting engine that solved a sales and delivery problem. It's a 1 hour peer discussion where they'll dive deep into the significance of recruiting beyond just a function, but as a core driver of business outcomes. Check it out.
Thank you for joining us today. This is the February 2024 Job Sync Recruitment Roundtable. Happy day after Valentine's Day. I hope you all had a good day yesterday. Today we are joined by Brigitte Orrick from the Davy Tree Expert Company, and running the session per usual will be our Chief Commercial Officer, Leah Daniels. And just a few housekeeping reminders that we have two conversations that normally happen, the one happening here live on camera and the one happening in the chat. So whichever you're more comfortable with participating in, please. We'll be keeping an eye on both, but we do highly encourage you to jump in and join the conversation. You may have noticed when you came on that you're a camera and mic already, so you are able to join in, ask questions, tell dad jokes. Do you have a Valentine's Day story you'd like to share? Sure. Well, as long as we can weave it into the topic. So I'm going to hand it off to Leah, who will tell you a little bit about JobSync, and then we're going to jump in with Brigitte and talk all about everything today. Leah.
Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see some folks from overseas. I know people are still pouring in. We'll let that keep going. Thank you guys all for joining us today. Today's topic is around tying your recruitment process to business outcomes. So one of the things that I think we all could do a better job of is making sure that when we're talking about what we're doing in our recruiting and talent operations, that we are not just thinking about how do we lower our cost to fill or shorten our time to fill, but really how does this impact the business? What is the business outcome? So we want to really dive into that today. A little bit about JobSync. So we are a hiring operations platform. We have built a system that really lets companies automate all the steps in between the minute you want to get a job out to market and getting a candidate back into your ATS. So all of the manual processes that everybody enjoys doing, put that into full automation and really bring the application experience to the candidate, meet them where they're at. So that might be on a job board where you are experiencing entire native application, like on an Indeed, for example, or replacing your career site experience where you're confronted with my favorite experience. Please create a username and password, give us a small DNA sample, perhaps your life story. Now you may apply for the job. So how do we really make that experience a lot more smooth for our candidates and really an easier way for candidates to raise their hand and for us to get excited about talking to them? So that's what JobSync's about. Today we have Brigitte Orrick, as Lex has mentioned. She is the Director of Talent Acquisition at Davy Tree Expert Companies. Full disclosure, she is also a client here, but we're really excited to have her talk about the story of Davy Tree. They have a really interesting story through COVID, and we want to sort of dive in how Brigitte and team, because Brigitte was very clear with me, this was never a one-person operation. The team came together to really thrive and hit business goals, and so we want to start with that. Brigitte, I did mute you just for the beginning here because there's a little bit of feedback, so just make sure you unmute, and I'm going to let you jump in and talk a little bit about you in the business and get us started for today.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Well, it's so nice to meet everyone. I wish that we were sitting around a table with cups of coffee or something so that it could be just more of a casual conversation, but we have the beautiful technology to help support the conversation, so we'll go from there. So a little bit about the Davy Tree Expert Company. You may or may not be familiar with our organization. We are in the green industry. We have environmental and utility services that are our clients. And we are in almost every major metropolitan in the United States and Canada. This last year, we closed our year out with 1.7 billion in annual sales. So we officially crossed the threshold to a medium-sized organization. And at our highest point last year, we were at 12,200 employees. At our peak. We do have a little bit of fluctuation that's associated with some of our H-2B workers, which we welcome from Mexico and from the Northern Triangle. And then, so we have a little bit of fluctuation there. And then also some of that is tied to some of our sales and revenue and how things kind of slow down with the seasons and the chilling of the winter months. So we've been employee owned since 1979, and we're going to be celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. So that's a really huge milestone. And I'd also like to say that makes us number 8 in the country for employee-owned organizations. It creates a unique culture. And it's one in which we all have a shared ownership associated with our collective success. So whether that be in sales or in talent or other outcomes that we're trying to accomplish with our clients, we believe that they're all interrelated, and we genuinely believe in the success of each other. So I just have to give a quick shout out to my colleague, Heather Aitano, that's here on, she's here joining me today, and she is probably one of the persons that helped inspire me to get more into the digital platform and figure out how we could leverage this in an industry that doesn't necessarily always feel very comfortable with technology. So some people call us, you know, a unique culture, and other people say we're a little bit of a cult of tree huggers. And I would definitely identify with that latter point of view, in that people that work at Davy within the green industry, within the green sector, we do really believe strongly in the success of our company and how we're different, how we can meet our clients' needs. So first of all, I will say, because of that, we have an awesome employer brand. And we're able to leverage that through different technology platforms. But where other businesses, and of course, this is not going to be a popular perspective, because economists are talking about labor shortages, talent shortages, workforce shortages. And it's hard for me to ignore that, you know, those are very prominent and expert voices that are speaking to us, that are helping us to, you know, guide us and navigate through this time. Our company hasn't experienced that. I wouldn't say that we necessarily have ever had a talent shortage that we've been navigating, but we had to teach the business that. And that's something I want to talk a little bit more about, because when we started going live with JobSync, and when we started that process, we learned that, you know, our brand was really solid, and that we were able to attract the right kind of talent to our organization. So we've been live. I was trying to remember this. Maybe, I think we're coming up on 18 months. Does that sound right, Leah?
It does. I think we're just about 18 months in March.
Yeah, and I've been getting some recent feedback from the business that's just said, boy, you know, the quality of candidates has really gone up in the last year. And so I think we're doing a better job of targeting the right talent for our roles as well. So very cool stuff.
Awesome. So, Bridget, before we got on, we had a whole bunch of questions that you and I were talking about. And I think the biggest question to think about is, in a company like Davy, where services depend on people, you cannot make money, really, if you don't have people to do the work, right? How did you, looking at the organization, tie recruiting to revenue and then get the rest of the organization on board with that construct?
Right. That's a great question. The first thing I will say is that we're in the service industry. So when we sell our services, that's how we generate our revenue. And we're very niche. We hire a lot of arborists, people that have expertise in trees and the green and growing world. And there are not enough colleges or schools out there that are producing individuals that have those skills. It's just, the volume isn't there. When the company started in 1880, way back when, there was a deep understanding and a knowledge that we were going to have to skill people up. We were going to have to teach them the science of trees, the science of arboriculture, and give them the skills to be able to complete those tasks. So I will say we have that on our side. We have an exceptional employee development that helps us with that. But the talent pipeline is directly tied to sales. And it's really kind of twofold. So I'll first start by saying, when we understand the headcount trends and practices that happen within the business, we can better understand the relationship between revenue and people. So traditionally, we've staffed up in the spring when the green and growing, you know, the world comes back alive in the United States and Canada in the spring, and our sales increase drastically. People pick up the phone and they say, boy, my tree isn't leafing out like it usually does this time of year. So it used to be that we would staff up hard in the spring and allow things to trickle or tail off in the fall. And that fluctuation in a company our size was between 1,000 to 1,500 people per year, which meant that we would have this cyclical hiring cycle that would happen in the spring. And that became untenable for our employees, especially as we got closer to COVID and COVID hit. We were moving our talent strategy to align with our sales strategy, which was, we need to do this year round. Tree work doesn't have to only be done in the spring. We need to work really closely with our clients to ensure that we have year-round work. It's better for trees, it's better for our employees, it creates greater stability. So the sales strategy started migrating in that direction, and we were able to help support employee development year-round as well as part of that. So understanding, what is happening there, what are the trends, what's going on. And we know intrinsically, at our corporate headquarters, which is in Kent, Ohio, that when headcount goes up, that should be equivalent to sales going up. But there's been some other things that have kind of happened over the last couple of years, like rapid inflation. We've had to increase our costs. And associated with that, we've had to increase some of our prices. And it's difficult to say that headcount is directly tied to revenue when you know that you're having pricing changes, costs, inflation, all these other kind of variables that are tied to it as well. So what it did do for us is help us with understanding, by studying headcount, we know that our managers, with the business, the corporation is looking at how headcount increases, and they know that then that gives them the ability to go sell the work. But managers also control costs with their labor. And we know that they will, at the end of the year, when they're trying to meet their margins, when they're trying to meet their profits, they'll just be slow in their hiring process at the end of the year because they're trying to put money on the bottom line. So what we were observing was just this disconnect that was happening between what the revenue goals were with the organization and the sales goals were, and with what our managers were actually doing in the field. And there, not only was it like a disconnect, but there was a lack of understanding in the talent pipeline, like how they could impact headcount and increase sales confidence with people that were working in the field. So that's something I really want to hit hard on here, Leah. Is the idea that salespeople are confident when they have the right talent on the team. It's a twofold thing. What happens is the salespeople kind of look around in their office, and because we have a distributed workforce and we're in every major metropolitan, there's these microcultures in those locations, and managers will work with their salespeople to say, we've got to increase sales, we've got to get out there. But the salespeople are looking at their team, the people that are going to be doing the work, the technicians, the arborists, our climbers, our healthcare technicians. They're looking at that talent and they're saying, if I go sell this, are these people going to be able to do the work? And there's a level of team intimacy that has to exist between those persons where they know that if I go sell the work, they can go do the work, and vice versa, right? So if you have all these additional complex things that are happening in the business, that all those are interrelated and tied to the talent pipeline. Does that make sense?
Right. There's nothing worse than having your salespeople believe that if they sell something, you can't then deliver on those promises, right? There's nothing worse, right? And that would be the end of the business, slowly, but the end of the business. And so the confidence of being able to know that the recruiting team is in lockstep with the sales organization has got to be like the first foundational block, right, for success.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say what we were seeing is that disconnect that was happening at corporate. There was a lack of downward pressure. There was only pressure on sales, but there wasn't pressure on headcount or talent acquisition and that correlation that was associated with it. There was a massive information gap that existed between what our executives wanted and what we were able to realize in the field. So if we didn't tie those metrics together, if we didn't find a way to interconnect headcount with sales and find a way to show the data behind those things, we were going to have a huge mess, because to me, it just felt like we were kind of going like this. The conversation wasn't, the right conversation wasn't happening. And the incentives weren't there for that conversation to happen.
So I'm a big fan of, don't bring your opinion to my data fight, right? Bring your data. How did you bring data into that conversation to start to build the confidence? Because I think that's what it is, right? It's just building confidence in the teamwork.
Well, it's funny because when I first came to the organization, I asked a question like, well, how many people do we need to have? And no one could answer that question for me. That was very interesting, that no one inside the organization or within the talent acquisition team, we started by trying to build these complex guessing models to say, well, we think they may want this many people, and then we're trying to build a support structure and talent acquisition behind that. And what we were starting to feel like is, well, we're pushing our services on them. They're not actually requesting our support or our service. So, and at some point I realized, I was like, you know what? It's up to me as the leader of this department. I need to go kick someone in the shin, so to speak. I didn't physically do that. That would never be appropriate. I need to go kick someone in the shin and say, we've got to have goals. We have to have real numbers here. And those goals have to be measurable, and we need help with the accountability piece of things. So it started, we're an SAP SuccessFactors shop. If you've ever worked with SuccessFactors, there are some challenges associated with bringing that data to life, and especially in an organization where people like getting a margin report on paper, like that it's delivered to their inbox. So we had to examine what our BI software was able to do and what we could put in front of them. And we made some really basic KPIs, and that was, we've got to have headcount by geographic location, by branch manager, where we can associate accountability with that one person that's making the hiring decision, and then make that come to life, have it roll up. And so it wasn't just as easy as getting them to establish headcount goals, because headcount was tied to sales.
Right.
So we had to pull their teeth. They didn't want to respond to, well, we don't, and it was because it was the confidence factor, right? It was well, if we say that this is what our head count is going to be, we know we're going to be held accountable to that, which means we have to sell to it. Right. And that was it took away the excuse. That meant it got scary all of a sudden. So we just created some custom reports that were saying, here's what your headcount goals are. Here's what your variance is from that headcount, and showed them the talent pipeline, because we were still seeing, we were getting, annually, we're going to probably hire 7,000 people this year. We are in a little bit higher turnover industry. And some of that is associated with our contracts. Not all of it is associated with our career paths. So, especially in the utility industry, we have things that come and go all the time. But what we were seeing is that when we started structuring conversations, so it wasn't just a matter of create this report. It was the accountability of having conversations on a monthly basis, getting the right people to the table, saying, hey, listen, if this is still your headcount goal, this is your goal. These are not our numbers. You said that this is what the number was at the beginning of the year, and you're holding yourself accountable to it. If you don't like this number, change it. That's fine too. But then you've got to justify that to your executive with the sales, right? That's not up to us. I don't want to be in the sales conversation.
Right.
I don't want to, that's uncomfortable.
So it's interesting because for many organizations, I'm just going to mute you, Bridget, for 1 second, because I'm getting feedback when I talk. For many organizations, if you have a set of bodies that you need in order to deliver work, if you don't deliver those bodies, you have options. You can bring in temps. You can pay overtime. You can extend your workforce, right? You can do other things. But if I'm not mistaken, you guys are a highly regulated organization and industry, right? You don't have the same luxury to say, listen, I know you've already worked a 40-hour week, but I'm going to ask you to work another 10 or 15 hours this week. in a tree with a chainsaw. So how does that play into the overall conversation where you can't just tap your existing workforce and extend them a little bit further?
It's a great question. So first of all, I will say that Davie really prides ourselves in our safety culture. And we empower every employee to be able to call an all-stop when they don't feel safe or when they don't feel trained to approach a tree a certain way. We are working with dangerous equipment. We're working with chainsaws and chippers, and we're ascending trees. We're working at height. We believe that our employees are industrial athletes. So when you think about things from that approach, it's a very specialized niche industry. You don't want to contract that in because it creates additional liabilities associated with the workforce. So we are regulated by OSHA, and we are, our safety ratings are the best in the industry, but that's because of the culture. And so we know we can't go out and just source labor that's out, that we can contract in. That's never going to happen. It's not the culture of our organization. That doesn't support employee development. Instead, what we do is really focus on skill development, skill attainment, and helping our employees. We breadcrumb them along in their training and development so that they do become more qualified over time.
So that takes away an opportunity for you, right? So now you have a clear culture, you have very fixed numbers, you've got sales that's now being held accountable. That means that your team is now very much held accountable, right? There's no wiggle room anymore. So you have the same technology set up as everyone else, not exactly the same, everybody's got their own, but like you have an ERP system that you have to work through, right? You have the same access to job boards and job candidates. You have the same resources in terms of employer branding. I mean, you don't have anything, I would say, that's very different in terms of resources, other than maybe your branding and your company culture, which are obviously unique to you. How do you then pull that together to really outpace some of your competitors? How do you make that all work for you? And what changes did you have to bring into your organization to do that? Oh, you're muted. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I'll unmute. So there was an alignment that had to happen. We had to align the recruiting team to the business, and 100% of the team is remote. They're not showing up to a brick and mortar location. They are talent acquisition professionals. They're not arborists, even though some of them had some prior experience working in the business or, on those kinds of things, and they found their niche within talent acquisition. They really consider themselves to be HR professionals. So the alignment had to happen, and we had to develop intimate relationships, and I'm not using the word inappropriately, like intimate business relationships where trust could be formed between the recruiter and the hiring managers. So it was figuring out how many hiring managers in our organization can one recruiter support and build trust and be able to bring in that viable pipeline of talent. Because it's kind of easy to sell when you're the Lorax. It's easy to sell people on, hey, you're going to impact climate change because you're going to make trees healthy. You're going to get to come into this sustainable business structure. Like all that sounds really attractive to people in this younger generation. However, the day that you show up to work and you're working in someone's yard and it's hot outside, you're getting exposed to ticks and bees, you're running a chainsaw, you're wearing PPE that's heavy and hot, right? And you might have to ascend a tree multiple times this week. Like that's a whole other reality. So, and I would say within the culture of our teams and local branch offices, there's an intimacy that is created within those teams because they have to rely on each other for safe work practices. They have to be able to communicate effectively. And we have a very diverse workforce, meaning that not everyone looks like each other. Not everyone identifies as the same gender as one another. So the culture within that group has to be very intertwined and bound in trust. So, and when someone first comes to the organization, and if they're novice, they don't have experience working in the green sector or working in those intimate team structures, that can be intimidating. It can be very scary. So the recruiter has to be able to sell the job, sell the work, sell the, this is the social impact that you get to have. And at the same time, find someone that's going to be a right fit for that team, right? Can you be vulnerable about what your skill level is and be willing to learn and want to work hard, right? So
it's fascinating, right? Because there's so many cross-functional elements in your organization from a recruiting standpoint, right? You've got the sales component, which is typically not something that a lot of organizations have to deal with. They do often deal with the hiring manager, so that's not new. But if I'm not mistaken, in a lot of your hiring teams, you actually need the whole team to be complete to make it all work, right? You can't send out half a team. And so
No.
you really need a team that's cohesive and will stick together and last. Because if you're constantly churning in a particular team, one or two people, it makes that team deployment really difficult. Am I reading that correctly? So
absolutely.
it just adds another layer, right, from your recruiting org of things that they have to contemplate and deal with in terms of how do you build that, to your point, cohesive team that really is going to stick together to deliver on the services.
For sure. In fact, even after we integrated with JobSync and we had a huge, at first we were seeing this massive increase in the number of applications received, right? Like that, there was a lot more coming in. And I always said it was like we opened up the net to capture more. We were getting more unqualified persons, but we were also getting a huge number of more qualified individuals too. So it gave the recruiters someone to work with, right? They had more that they could work with. They had more conversations that they could have with people, where before we weren't quite seeing those opportunities. It was more of a sales conversation. And of course, we have some markets where it's easier to find talent than other markets, labor markets in the United States. But yeah, I would say the recruiter has a tough job, and they need to know how to pre-screen candidates. They need to know how to work with those individuals to really make it, make it part. The team, it's interesting because the confidence that the team has kind of in the crew leader and in the skill level that those persons have, that reinforces the confidence in the salespeople and vice versa. So they definitely have to have a good fit there.
When you're thinking about, because you just said something interesting, right? Which is you've opened up the net. I always say that applicant tracking systems are applicant tracking systems. They're not candidate capturing systems. Actually,
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of that at times. By bringing in enough candidates, right? Even you are going to get, right? If the floodgates open, you get good and bad. It happens, right? But when you start to bring in enough candidates that you can actually deliver on all of those promises that you've made to the business and thinking through how do you bring this through to success for your business, does that create another set of downstream problems? Do you then find you have a new set of things that maybe were bubbling beneath the surface that you now have to deal with? Like either you need more automation or you need to think about how you organize your team differently. What was the impact of really changing the front end of your system and your process?
Well, we saw new bottlenecks, right? New bottlenecks in the process. Like all of a sudden, because we had more access to more talent and we had more people coming in the door, the new bottleneck became in getting it over the finish line and hiring. So it was kind of like the problem shifted a little bit more downstream, even though it was probably always there.
Yeah.
And I would say some of that we've also experienced. Every recruiting structure or talent acquisition structure is on a maturity curve. And we were really still getting things established in the last couple of years, putting together service level agreements, understanding what the business needed, helping them to understand what we could do and what we couldn't do, what we were good at versus what they needed to, what they needed to be good at also. So one of the things that bubbled up, and I would say this is more of a maturity thing, was our applicant tracking system, success factors, really had these out of the box disposition codes.
Yep.
And like people were, we had some areas where certain people groups were falling out of the process, and there were some trends that we were observing. And there was this question of, well, why is that happening? And the recruiters, we were looking at each other and we're like, well, we don't know. And we thought that maybe the right step was to integrate deeper into success factors by flipping on Interview Central and getting all the questions. And that way we have so much more detailed information. But what that would actually cause is more engagement from hiring managers. And we were already struggling with that. So right about then, we had some transition in leadership, and we had a person come in from the outside. It's actually our brand new director of talent acquisition. And he said, well, anything that requires the business to do more when we're already struggling with, some of the input that we need to receive from them is not going to be successful. And he had such a simple solution. He was like, let's just update the disposition codes to have a better understanding. And that was something we didn't even think about doing because we didn't know. We didn't know that we could, number one. Yeah. And number two, recently, my colleague Heather that's on the line here, she's been working on coming up with new disposition codes that can more accurately describe why people are falling out of the process. And so I'm really excited to see that launch in the next couple of months, because it'll give us new information, new insight to help us better understand how we can refine our processes and our practices. So yeah, it's all part of the maturity curve though, right? Wouldn't you call it that? Is understanding where you need more information and where it's most useful, and how you can actually capture it from your organization.
We had Heidi Gerhardt on a few months ago. For those of you who missed that one, she's the VP of Talent Operations for MasterCard. And one of her core tenets, especially with talent operations, is don't go back and fix your data. Can't do that. But get more clarity, move forward, capture new data. So to what you guys are doing, right? Like there's no point in trying to go back and fix the past, but looking forward, how can we get more intelligent, more information, more data out? I think that's super interesting, because it's one of those questions that you're going to be confronted with, especially with volume, right? Like you need to understand with volume. And on the flip side, I feel like the industry cares about, did you talk to them? Did you interview them? Did you offer them anything? And did you hire them? And everything else is a no-go. And that's really not true, right? I was just talking to another SuccessFactors customer of ours, and he was saying how important it is to understand in his data who is not hireable at all versus who said no. The difference between you are unhireable and you will always be unhireable versus somebody who, the timing didn't work out, or they had another offer, or whatever it might be. And that level of detail in their data and the ability to access it and use it. So that's the second part, is how do you use that data now that you have it and make sure you're operationalizing it? Super interesting, because it is one of the challenges I think a lot of these ERP systems have, is that you can perhaps get the data, but then you have to figure out, now what do I do with it? How do I operationalize it? So probably the thing you guys are starting to think about now that you're putting this in place is, what will we do with this data other than look at it? Which is nice. I'd like to look at it.
Yeah. What's next with it, right? Like that's a great point. The other thing is, I think we have to remember, applicant tracking systems are designed to protect companies. They are not designed to create an elegant experience for candidates. And they have high potential. The other side of that is, while they're protecting the company for compliance, they're creating these miserable experiences, and it's creating in the job market very difficult circumstances for people that really are authentically looking for work. Like they want to join your organization, and they have to try to bust through this digital interface to be able to get the attention of the recruiter or the hiring manager. So I feel like you've got to kind of look at that situation and say, employers are frustrated with the labor market. The labor market's frustrated with employers. Where can you have competitive gains, competitive edges in that space? And it's in the human connection. Respond to applicants. If you create new measures, and this is kind of difficult to measure it coming out of SuccessFactors and the data we have available to us. But if you set the standard with the recruiting team to say, get back to the applicants within 24 to 48 business hours, just respond to them, talk to them, try to schedule a conversation, with the ones that are viable candidates, or disposition them so that they get the automatic notification, or suggest other job opportunities in the company, right? It's about candidate engagement, and it's on the recruiter to create that experience. So, yeah, and I don't know if they're still in a place where they're measuring that today. Like, I know that I had a narrow focus on that, but that was really what created the competitive advantage, is that there's so many other employers, and even in our sector, that are just using their ATS as a place to collect resumes, and it's like a file cabinet, right?
Dust. We're collecting dust. Kevin Grossman, who does a podcast with me, talks about the candidate experience and the expectations of candidates, right? And a lot of them actually have very low expectations. They just want a response. They just want to know yes or no.
Yeah.
For it to be in a timely manner. But one of the things that we're seeing in market, and for those of you who listen to me ramble on about stuff all the time, increasingly we have this gap between the humans to do the work and the number of opportunities for work, right? And so just last year, we ended the year with 2 million more jobs than people to do the jobs, right? And that's only going to get worse in the next 6 years as we move into 2030. So from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges in front of talent teams is the people you reject today are the people you're going to have to hire tomorrow. And if we're not thinking about that next swing and round of people and hires we're going to make it, if it's not them, it's going to be their neighbor or their son or their daughter or their friend. So our worlds are actually very, very small, and the compression on talent is getting worse. So how we disposition these people out, how we say thank you but no thank you, maybe next time, maybe later, I think is really, really important, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That interaction is crucial. It's critical. I think I just digitally blipped. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It happens to me all the time.
There's something I want to add on that, Leah, and I'm curious because I follow and I study those economic trends very closely, because I feel like in a medium-sized company, you can apply some of those broad trends within your own organization, right? Because you're large enough. And if you're in a bunch of markets, you're going to see those things kind of bubble up as well. But there's something missing in that data. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say the economists missed one key thing. And that is that today's employee is not only working for you. I think there's maybe 5 to 7%, and y'all can challenge me on this, at maybe 5 to 7% of people that are working for 2 organizations. And if that's the case, there are more, the unemployment rate is actually underrepresented. So because I only have my own experience working inside my company and working in my organization and looking at our numbers. And I know this is we are working with a different set of people than maybe what a technology firm is, right? Like, or a retail organization or financial services or things like that. But we're not seeing that. So it makes me wonder, I'm just wondering, like, are the economists missing something that's key? So I don't know. I'll put that out there for consideration. And, I know maybe I'm not an economist. I'm not, but it just makes me wonder, because I talk to my friends and I talk to other people. I have one girlfriend, she works in marketing. She has 2 jobs, right? And I can't imagine that. That would be the most complex thing to try to do. But if in your own social circles, there are people that are doing it, I just wonder how many.
I think we have all sorts of complexities in the U.S. economy. One is being our white collar market versus our blue collar market, and how different those two are. We definitively have a generational and birth rate decline, where we were having babies every 20 years. Now we have them every 30 years. We were having almost 4. Now we're having less than 2. So we have a clear decline. Now, one would argue that should support long-term a lessening need. But in the meantime, especially right now, We also have a population that lives longer and needs more services longer. So, I think the economists have some things right. So over time, we're going to need less teachers because we will have less children, but we will need more healthcare because people live longer and have more needs and requirements and demands on the healthcare system. I think AI is one of the real twists to this story, which is there's a lot of optimism about how AI is going to change the nature of our workforce. I think there's also a stark reality that the more efficiencies you create, the more government regulation you get, the more need for auditors and accountants, my two favorite jobs. Everybody tell your kids, get a finance degree. We're seeing, I think, changes in the workforce. We also have some social pressures that are impacting, right? So we have more and more people telling kids you have to go to college, don't get a trades job. So we do have these huge gaps in trades positions. And I think you guys would probably fall into that, but yet aren't seeing it, which is interesting. But how much of that is because of the moves you've made in order to be ahead of other organizations? So for example, if we were to ask one of your big competitors, what are they seeing? Do they have the same experience you have, or are they having a different experience?
Yeah. They're not. They are not seeing the same trends. And that's because, I could rip apart what their strategies are, and I'm not going to list what any of those organizations are. But first of all, they have a scarcity mindset. If your scarcity mindset is allowed to perpetuate the same way that we were struggling to get headcount goals and associate them with sales and create transparency across our whole organization, if you believe you can't get the talent and you allow that to be your excuse, then you won't get the talent. Like you've got to, so everything from creating a great culture to having exceptional employee development. I would say out of all of the businesses in our sector, there's probably only a couple of others. And for the most part, tree care businesses or landscaping organizations or those that are working in utility vegetation management, environmental services, we are one of the biggest. There are many family-owned businesses that are very small, and it's difficult for them to wrap their hands around how do we create effective employee development, right? Like that's hard. That we branded that from day one. John Davey, when he started the company in 1880, he knew there were no colleges that had arboriculture. He was the father of arboriculture. He brought it and he created the science. He created the field. So since he knew that he had to create exceptional employee development, and that's been the edge for the company. Is that this is interesting because even around the Great Depression, there were newspaper articles in Cleveland, Ohio, which is just outside of where our corporate headquarters are located. Davey trained arborists. So our employee development was the hallmark of the organization from day one. And we don't shy away from that. We may have people that come and get to experience our employee development, and they may leave our organization, but they're going to come back because
there used to be this company, for those of you who are old like me, you might remember Ayers, and they used to measure their success by the number of resumes on, this is a Monster, so like we're going back here, people. The number of resumes on Monster where people said they were Ayers certified. They would look for that term, and they would look for how many resumes were on saying they were, Ayers certified, and that was a measure of their success. They felt that they were doing their job because they had got recruiters to feel that it was so important to put it on their resume. And I think the same is true around like the Xerox sales training, right? You had Xerox sales training for many years. That was the gold standard. And I think that that's something you guys should be proud of, right? I do wonder, do you measure that? Do you guys think about how do you make that a metric for yourselves?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've never thought about doing that before, like just scanning to see who has had prior Davey experience. And are they successful? It's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, our employee development is what gets people skilled up to make them stay. If they leave us and they frequently want to come back because of our stock ownership program, that is transformational. Like personally, what attracted me to Davey was, listen, I was an okay forester. I wasn't a great forester. I was an okay forester. and Davy doesn't even really provide those services. But as I was developing my workforce development and my talent career in human resources, I realized I was becoming very specialized and very niche, right? And I didn't have to be good at tree care anymore. I didn't have to be good at sales or marketing or some of the other functions that the company could offer, but I could become an owner just by participating in the stock purchase program. So now I feel today empowered as an owner of the business just through our stock ownership program to build wealth for my family. And you'll see, I've recently posted on LinkedIn just a note on that, like, what has Davy stock provided for my family? And that's a beautiful thing. So even if they leave us and they go try to strike out on their own and, you know, start their own tree care business, I mean, it's easy to throw a chainsaw on the back of a truck, right? And now you're open for business. But after a while, you have to diversify your skills. You have to become really good at a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And that can wear you out. So those companies will either have an exit strategy where they try to sell back to Davy, or they'll come back to us and potentially come in as a sales arborist or as a manager in some capacity because they've been on the business end of managing something in our industry before.
Coming back a little bit to the nature of the business itself, I would argue that in your business, more than many, recruiting isn't just necessary. It is actually strategic to the outcomes of the business. So with that sort of mindset, what does that mean when you guys are talking about planning, when you're thinking about the growth of the business? I think a lot of companies say, I wish TA got brought to the table. I wish we knew what was happening. How much do you get to be brought into these conversations, given that you guys have such a direct line to so many parts of the org?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are part of the human resources infrastructure. So, but it's interesting to me because HR traditionally was a separate department. So we merged together, which was the right fit for Davy, by the way. It's what we needed to do to ensure compliance and some of the other good things that HR provides for us. But talent acquisition and talent development still have a seat at the table with our what we call our senior management team, because as the company continues to grow, like we're tracking towards 2 billion, 2.5, 3 billion, and we want to know what that growth trajectory is going to look like. Ever since we added a robust investment in talent acquisition, really in the last 5-6 years, we had a $500 million increase in revenue. And our employee headcount, so the people that are working in our company, increased with that as well. We were about 8,500 persons. Today we're at 12,500, right? Now, those lines don't track exactly the same. Like as revenue increases, headcount is not always directly tied to it, because we can sell more services. There's economies of scale that happen within the organization as you start to grow. But the revenue projections have always been tied to not only just headcount, but also to the talent acquisition team. So investments made here have had, we'll put $5 million, we're not quite that big, about $4 million of an investment into talent acquisition and talent development. And that's going to turn into $500 million in additional revenue.
Yeah, you can't find out about this in January, and you need to deliver that year, right? And I think that, do you think there are certain arguments that other people can take away from this conversation to bring them closer to that moment where they are getting that information ahead of time, right? I do think a lot of talent teams suffer from here's your goals for this year in November, December, January, whatever it might be, but it's not, here's the 5-year plan and how you're going to be impacted in that 5-year plan, right? It's very much reactionary and more of a transactional role in the business.
Yeah.
Are there certain things that you think businesses and leaders can do in order to really set themselves up to be part of that conversation, to make sure that they've brought the data or whatever it might be that they need to the conversation?
Yeah, well, I think it's just, you have to own the fact that you're part of the revenue equation, And don't let anyone tell you that you're not. That's just, you just have to own it. You're part of the sales strategy. You're part of what builds the confidence of the organization to be successful over time. There's also a talent retention factor that's part of it too. And I never miss the opportunity to say, headcount growth is a combination of these variables, right? But you have to own it. You never disassociate the two. Organizational growth, organizational revenue is absolutely hand in hand with talent acquisition. And you show them, you use every opportunity to get in front of your executives to show them this is why we're committed to that. Now you may supervise, and I know I've got persons of many different organizational sizes here. There's the day-to-day task of interacting with candidates, right? And there are times that recruiters are nose down. They are working hard. They are working with their candidates, and they don't see how their role or how their job is tied to sales. You have to remind your team of that. Keep that in front of them. Help them understand how revenue is tied to their job and to their function, and how it's helping them to be successful overall.
That's a good point, Rick, because we all think about how do we argue up, but we really need to be thinking, how do we argue up, sideways, and down so that everybody is on the same page? Because it's not a matter of it making it to the leader of talent and they know, but no one else on the team knows. It's not a secret, right? If you don't bring everyone into the fold, they also can't be part of the solution, right? They can't bring in creative opportunities and other things that might be valuable. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to either send Brigitte a LinkedIn, hit us up. We're thrilled to have all of you guys here. Thank you so much and have a great Thursday.
Looking for your next HR technology role? Go to your browser, type in hrtechjob.com and browse hundreds of jobs with the best HR technology vendors. HR tech professionals finally have a dedicated job marketplace to find work or be found. Sign up for job alerts or post a resume. Discover jobs with companies like Workday, Phenom, HiBob, Deal, and more. You'll even find HR tech roles with employers in case you want to work with managing HCM or HRIS platforms. HR Tech Job, the only job market for HR technology careers. Join us at hrtechjob.com.